Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Oosh, oosh. Ready, steady, go!
That's turned into the Matrix song, too.
The
lobby song.
Yeah.
I remember thinking that was the coolest thing.
Sound like the Mortal Kombat song, which we've already done.
Dude, all the songs in the 90s, all the techno songs sound the same.
They sound the same. What was that? There's the one from Blade also, where they're all in the club.
Yeah.
I forget how that one goes, but
My favorite part of the Blade is still at the end of the first one, where they're just both doing the same move. Yeah, they're just going 1, 2, 1, 2, but the camera's flying around them. You're like, oh, it's so cool.
I always point to Blade as like one of those early movies I remember where all of a sudden the good guys were just totally dominant from start to finish of a movie.
Yeah.
It used to be like Luke Skywalker or Indiana Jones, and they would be like, they were just bumbling and not very good, and the bad guy would just kick their butt like up and down for the whole movie.
They would always barely escape.
Yeah. And then Blade came along, and he was just like, you're like halfway in the movie, and you're like, wait, this skinny British dude is supposed to be scary to Blade?
Yeah.
Blade can kill like 50 vampires without even blinking.
This is Wesley effing Snipes too, man.
Yeah,
he doesn't care about you, taxes, or vampires. Yeah, he's great.
Oh, is everybody listening to this whole thing?
Yeah, I think so. Welcome to the Command Zone, everybody.
How's it? Oh, crap. What happened?
Well, my name is Jimmy. I'm one of your hosts.
I'm Josh.
I'm one of your limited resources.
Jeez.
Take that, Marshall.
Take that.
Woo! Off to a good start, as
Off to a
always.
really great start. Today's topic is situation awareness. Not situational awareness.
Just situation.
Just situation awareness.
Yeah, how is it different?
It's different than situational awareness because we were going to talk about sort of taking note and therefore like adapting to your meta and the types of situations that you are often facing. So that's what situation awareness is. But first, we have an announcement.
Should we put on like sad music?
Don't cry. Don't cry for me, Argentina.
Don't cry for me, podcast listeners.
So this announcement is that we're not going to be doing 2 episodes every week anymore.
Yeah. It's not like we did it forever either. It was like a summer thing.
Right, exactly. We never intended at the time we started doing it to do it forever. So we felt like
this milk has an expiration date.
Yeah. We felt like we kept it up for as long as we could. That doesn't mean we're not going to do a second episode some weeks, sometimes, occasionally, when we feel like it. I would say that the bonus episodes, I'll call them, the Thursday episodes, they're probably still going to happen, but they may not, they may evolve.
Yes, please.
They may turn into talking about some other things that aren't Commander. We may...
Yeah, we did this with the Keeping It Current episode, kind of just testing the waters, like, hey, let's just talk about the magic world at large.
Yeah, so we feel like, the Tuesday episode will stay what it is. It's always going to be Commander focused. It's going to be the exact same thing that you've come to know and expect from us. We're going to go, we're going to do deck doctors. We're going to do deck techs. We're going to talk about, level up moments and things like that. Mm-hmm. But the Thursday episode, it may sometimes be that also still, but we may talk about draft or just a limited environment in general, or we may just talk about current events in Magic like you were saying.
Or we could bring on like a guest like Marshall or something and just talk about, like maybe do like a little player interview or something.
Yeah, we could talk about Standard if we feel like it, or we could talk about Hearthstone if we wanted to, like the Masters of Modern guys just did.
I'm just kidding.
I mean, we're just going to leave that Thursday episode sort of up to our own discretion, both when we do it, which won't be every week, and what it's about.
Yeah, and also it's a great time to address, like, when you guys are all like, hey, can you guys please talk about something like tiny leaders? You know, that's the perfect chance for us to be like, cool, we can take an extra episode and not take away from our main content and discuss something like that. Yeah,
I will say also that one of the reasons that we went to 2 episodes per week is that a prominent Commander podcast at that time had sort of gone away, and we felt like there wasn't as much Commander content out there in the universe. And in that meantime, since we've started doing that, the Commanderin podcast with our friend Phil has started up and started doing really well. The Commander's Brew podcast with our buddy Andy Hull, who we've had on the show also, has started up. And so we feel like those podcasts are very good. You should definitely check them out if you're not, and they can sort of fill that void so that we're not necessarily, we don't need to do 2 episodes a week anymore. There's lots of Commander content out there now.
It's not like we were burned out or anything. And it was great getting all the emails being like, guys, please don't burn out. Like, you're blazing the trail right now. We're like at the front of it like, oh. But it's not we're burned out. We just, we're back to 1 a week.
Yeah. It was never our intention to be doing 2 a week forever.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's an intense thing. I remember back in the YouTube days, the first years of YouTube, one of the creators, Daystorm Power. Usually everyone's just once a week, one video a week, and Daystorm did 2 a week for a whole I think it was 2 years or something. That guy knew how to hustle, and he freaking made his own fame from it. It was awesome. I love Daystorm. He's one of the hardest workers I know. But yeah, Josh and I.
Speaking of that, we're not the most hardest workers,
Well, we do plenty of other things. We've mentioned some of our side projects and our main jobs as well on the show before. So time is limited, guys, and we want to play more limited. So
nice.
Boom.
Okay, so that's the sort of. I don't want everybody to be sad about it, but I guess some of you probably will be. That's just the reality of where we're at. And
you can always find us on Twitter. You can always find us and talk to us there about stuff, and we will always be available for you guys.
And there's a great opportunity actually to approach us about what's interesting to you, outside of Commander, so that we can really maybe start picking and choosing some of the subjects we want to tackle on those bonus episodes.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to doing that actually because the Masters of Marin guys have started doing a little bit, and it seems like I have a want to do
I was
it,
jealous of them when they did it, and I was like, you know what, this is a good idea.
Great idea. Yeah.
All right, on to situation awareness.
Did you mean situational awareness?
No, I did not.
Okay,
thank you for asking.
Just double checking.
So one of the tricks I think everybody knows to improving at Magic and really any game is just to diligently analyze what your experiences were after the fact.
After the game's over or after you've been eliminated?
Either one. After the whole session for the night is over, you're looking back on last night and thinking about it. And we've done this a lot. A lot of our topics have come from literally we played one night. The next day we talk, hey, what should we do the show on? And we have a good idea because it's based on, when I was playing last night, this thing happened and we should talk about that.
Yeah.
And so this is a way to improve. And we've talked about it on the show. We're pretty good about analyzing our own deck, what's working about it, what cards we need to take out, what we need to put in, maybe something that we draw and we're disappointed with it, that needs to come out of our deck. But we're not always as diligent about looking across the table or the left or the right, in our case, and analyzing what's going on with our opponents. And again, we've talked on the show a lot about some specific things like this card, here's how you counter this card, or this type of card. But there's also a lot of situations that come up when you're playing that you can notice different play groups, different situations may come up sort of more or less often. And if you pay attention to that, then you can sort of generalize some ways to build your deck or change your deck to counter those things.
Yeah, because it's Prophet of the Crucifix hits the board. All right, everyone knows what the response to that should be. But if it's opponent's playing a kind of a weird janky combo deck, not sure when it's about to go off, could be next turn, could be 5 turns from now. That's a much harder situation to gauge. And I think a lot of the times some of these games are just won by ignorance. People even I just kind of put it out of my head for just a little too long. And so situation awareness is great in being to know okay, I think I know what's going on here. I see the colors being played. Here's how I can deal with this.
And again, we've talked about these type of things a little bit. We've talked about how to defeat token decks. Well, your playgroup may have a lot of token decks. If you've got 2 or 3 you're facing at any one time, often in a night, then you need to build your deck to be able to beat a token deck. So we're not going to talk necessarily about that exactly. And that's the same as playing a lot of creatures. A token deck, basically how you beat it is very similar to how you beat just another deck that's playing a lot of creatures in general. But we're going to talk about some situations maybe that we haven't really touched on. The first one I have is a situation where my opponents have a lot of cards.
Yeah, altogether they do have a lot of cards, Josh.
So if you think about all your in their hand. If you think about all your EDH playing, I bet you'll notice that in any given game, there's usually a point where 1 or 2 players is holding a lot of cards, and I don't mean 7, I mean 20.
Yeah.
This is just
they found a way.
Yeah, it's a situation that just tends to come up a lot in EDH because there's a lot of card draw in the format.
It's also the goal of a lot of decks to get to that position so that they can close the game out because they have the cards that they need to win.
Yeah, I'm going to draw like a third of my deck, and then I'm going to be able to just control the whole board basically from there because I'll have enough answers for everything. So that's a very common situation that we come across, but we don't usually think of building our decks to punish a deck for having a lot of card draw.
Right.
So, this is something that I like to think about for my decks is how do I beat a lot of card draw? Now, one of the ways to do it is to just draw a lot of cards yourself so you're on even footing. That's a gimme. And most of your decks should already be built to draw a lot of cards. But what else can we do? What are some cards that punish my opponents for having a lot of cards in hand or for having a lot of card draw?
Discard.
Discard's a really good one. In fact, I really like discard effects that are like mass discard.
Yeah. Wheel of Fortune, man. The card is amazing.
Wheel of Fortune's great because it just resets everybody.
Winds of Wrath. Yeah, all those cards. Teferi's Puzzle Box.
Oh, you drew 20 cards? Well, guess what? And I only have 4? Guess what? Wheel of Fortune, we all have 7 again now.
Yeah, it's interesting the balance because again, like in those positions, you should come out better, especially if an opponent's been holding on to the cards that they really need in that position. They're like, hey, I have 1/3 of my combo piece in my hand. I'm going to draw them all next turn, and then you pop out Teferi's Puzzle Box. That just completely hoses what they were trying to do because now they have to throw all these things to the bottom and like, great, I'm not going to see that ever again. Like that happened a lot actually when we were playing at Andy's house the other night. I kept holding. I was playing a Planeswalker deck, and I finally drew my doubling season. I was like, "Yes, this is it." And then Teferi's Puzzle Box hit the board, and I was like, "This is not it."
Crap! Now I have to put it on the bottom of my library, and my whole plans change. Yeah, I really like Chandra Ablaze is a good one we've talked about before.
Oh,
she's a Planeswalker. I won't read it all, but her -2 is each player discards his or her hand, then draws 3 cards.
Really
now everybody's on even footing, but if you started with 20 cards and I started with 5. It did a lot more harm to you than it did to me.
Yeah, definitely.
That's another really good one. There's one called Balancing Act.
I wonder what is happening in the Balancing Act. Perhaps things are being balanced?
Yes. Now, see, Balance as a card is banned, but there's been a lot of fair versions, quote-unquote fair versions of Balance, and this is one of them. It's 2 and 2 white for a sorcery. It says each player chooses a number of permanents he or she controls equal to the number of permanents controlled by the player who controls the fewest, then sacrifices the rest. Each player discards cards the same way. So you just look around the table, whoever's got the fewest permanents, everybody sacrifices until they have that many, and then you do the same with cards in hand. So whoever has 4 cards in hand, if that's the least, everybody just goes down to 4 cards in hand.
Yeah, it's pretty insane because it's true when someone has like their Reliquary Tower out and they're like, oh, I just have a giant hand. There's nothing you can do about it. It's like, well, guess what? You're going to get screwed.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't really hurt everybody else that much. So you're really just punishing that player who drew a ton of cards.
And you may make one enemy, but that enemy has 4 cards now instead of 20. And everyone else is also kind of cheering you on at the same time.
And probably they wasted a lot of their time and energy up till now just drawing all those cards.
Yeah.
So you've really set them pretty far back in the game.
Spirit of the Labyrinth is another opposite of that. Kind of stops people from drawing cards. There's also like Notion Thief.
Which they draw cards and instead you draw the cards?
Yeah. So like there's ways to punish people for having these effects in their deck. And it's really easy to build your deck in a way to combat a really common thing, which is just card draw.
Yep. And I think these are very powerful things. Now, Spirit of the Labyrinth is a little tough because you can't draw extra cards either. It just says, what's the wording on
Each
it?
player can't draw more than 1 card a turn.
But
if someone's going off, you're totally okay with that.
Exactly. And presumably their deck has a whole bunch of cards in it that draw them cards, and you just turn all of those off. So that can be very powerful, especially if you're like, well, I have a couple card draw spells, but I don't have any out right now. Then I'll just slow everybody down to my level. That can be very strong. I also like cards that literally do damage or can kill you for having cards in your hand.
Yeah.
So Molten Psyche.
Well, that's why I love Rakdos Charm against token decks, because it takes their strategy and immediately hurts them. Yeah, Molten Psyche, you want me to read it?
Yeah.
1 red for a sorcery. Each player shuffles the cards from his or her hand into his or her library, then draws that many cards. Metalcraft, if you control 3 or more artifacts, Molten Psyche deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of cards that player has drawn this turn. This is a Nekusar win condition, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a win condition in Nekusar, but also I found it to be pretty useful in general in a decks that aren't making you draw a lot of cards because there's very often a player holding 20 plus cards, sometimes 30 plus cards. This will often just kill that player.
Yeah, that's insane.
They have that huge turn where they draw 24 cards off of Consecrated Sphinx and some other,
And
crap.
they're cackling all the way to
Yeah. And they're holding this huge grip of cards that's like bigger than their deck.
before
and
they
just
even
like,
get to their discard step because it's your turn before theirs. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and they're just smiling like crazy, and they're like, I have everything under control. And
Someone removes the Consecrated Sphinx, they don't care. They're like, I got my value.
Yeah, whatever. I got 40 cards in my hand. What are you going to do? And then you go Molten Psyche. If you have 3 artifacts out, which often we do because of mana rocks and things like that.
Well, if you're playing red too, it's definitely going to happen.
Yeah, so then they did have to discard they don't discard them. They shuffle 40 cards into their library and then draw 40 cards, but then they take 40 damage.
Yeah.
Good night.
It doesn't even need to be 40. I mean, even 20 should be enough at the point in the game where they're able to cast something like Consecrated Sphinx. And
Yep, very, very often you only need to do like 20 or so, and that'll just do it. But, I've killed many people with it, with nothing, no other card, no other combo, just like they're holding a grip of 35 cards, and that's just enough to do them in.
the best is when 2 people have Consecrated Sphinxes out, because then they can just loop those 2 until and just arbitrarily stop at a number and then be like, all right, I'm done at 60.
Yeah, when 2 people are colluding because they both have a Consecrated Sphinx, and they're like,
Yeah.
I'll draw 2. Oh, I'll draw 4. Okay, I'll draw 8. Oh, I'll draw 16. Okay, I'll draw 10 more and I'm done.
Yeah, exactly. It
and
doesn't even need to be doubles. It can be like, I'll draw 2. I'll draw 1.
Yeah, and then they're like, do you want to draw any more? I guess I'll draw a couple more. Okay, I'll draw a couple more.
Actually, you have to draw 2 each time, right? It has to be a multiple of 2 for Consecrated.
Yeah, I think so.
Pretty crazy.
Another card that's similar is Stormseeker. Also, Rune Flare Trap and Dreamborn Muse do similar things, which is just deal direct damage to a player for each card they have in their hand.
Yeah.
So these are just to the face, boom, take as much damage as you've got cards. These seem like bad cards on the surface, but if you're in a play group where you notice that very often somebody's holding like a whole bunch of cards, Stormseeker is just like kills them. Can be very, very powerful. I mean, would you play a card that said, pay 4 or 5 mana, deal 30 damage?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially if you knew it was going to happen at a certain point in each game, It's cool. You could even do something like this to disrupt a Nekusar player, because if their goal is already doing this and you're able to ice them,
Yeah, you can sort of piggyback off their stuff to kill them.
Yeah. Or even just end the game. Like, Molten Psyche, we all lose. I also really love Windfall. This card's awesome. 2 and a blue sorcery. Each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So it's like a opposite balance, except now everyone has a super overpowered hand because someone may have drawn 40 or whatever.
Yeah, if somebody drew 40 and you do that, you may mill them out. But also now you have 40 cards in your hand, so it automatically brought you to their level.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
So obviously we can't go through every card that would deal with opponents having a lot of cards in their hands, but it's just something I wanted to put out there as like, hey, you should think about that situation as a situation that you build your deck to fight.
Yeah, and it's not going to hurt you to have these cards in there. A lot of the times, I think Wheel of Fortune is great because sometimes you just have a bad hand.
You just want to cycle it.
You just want to cycle it. Yeah, you'll take the risk. You'll go for the Wheel of Fortune, and if it has the occasional or sometimes more than occasional upside of just hosing someone else that has drawn a bunch of cards, freaking
that's just great. Yeah,
applause.
That's just
the board.
upside.
Yeah, upside.
Okay, so let's talk about another situation that we should be aware of. And that's one where my opponents are playing a lot of counterspells.
Oh, I know how to combat this. Just don't play with that person. Just kidding.
Just complain about it a lot.
Complain, yeah. Post on Twitter like, God, this guy's stopping me from doing everything, and then he's taking my tears and casting more blue spells off of that.
Taking my tears and you tapping it for mana. That's
good. It was from Cardboard Crack. It was a really funny. I really like that one.
So this is something we hear obviously a lot. Complaints about the Mother May I deck, which is the deck that every time you cast something, you gotta go, are you gonna counter that?
That's unfairly gendered. It could be Father Can I as well.
Good. That's true. This doesn't have to be that type of deck only, though. It can be just like, in general, your meta has a lot of blue players, and between them all, they don't have dedicated counterspell decks, but there's just like, they're all running 10 counterspells each.
Yeah.
That's just a lot.
Or even just 3 each to make, 12 across the board. It's like that. There's a lot of counterspells running around.
There's probably going to be one anytime I cast something.
Yeah, exactly.
So, how can we combat this? Well, you can play counterspells yourself. And the good thing about this is I found that you normally have to run fewer counterspells.
That's how I operate in our meta.
Yeah.
I just run like 3 in my deck.
And if anybody's running 7, well, you're still going to be fine because you're going to be able to get through that thing you need to.
Yeah, exactly. They're not specifically aiming to counter just you. They have to worry about everyone else if they're going to be running that many counterspells, and you just have it for your own protection.
Yep, you're more looking to counter their counter
Yeah.
than you are counter their other spells.
Very rarely have I seen someone counter a counter and then the person that originally countered it being like, I got another one.
Yeah,
You know?
it happens, but it is pretty rare.
Yeah.
So that's one way to go. Another way that I think people don't think about is just to have more low casting cost stuff in your deck.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about counterspells is a couple things. One is they don't do anything to stuff that's already on the board.
Yep.
So if you can get something out before they've sort of got their counterspell wall set up, then it's a lot harder for them to deal with. Now, decks will be built to also deal with things on the battlefield, but it also allows you to play a spell and leave open mana if they counter it to play a second spell.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden they got to hold a couple of counters open. So that's a good general way to build your deck if you're seeing a lot of counter spells in your meta, is just lower the casting cost on your stuff.
And also give them the opportunity to mess up. You know,
Yeah,
they
counter
can counter
something
the
bad.
wrong thing. Yeah, I've seen a lot of people counter a demonic tutor.
Yeah.
Instead of waiting for them to fetch out whatever it is and countering that, you know, unless it's very specifically counter target instant or sorcery. But usually, like, you want to wait and see what they're going to fetch out, because then you're getting 2 cards out of them instead of just 1.
Totally. And then there are a whole group of cards that basically punish counter spells. So with the caveat that in general you want these to be low casting cost because you want to get them out early. But there's stuff like Grand Abolisher.
Yep,
That's one a lot of
cannot cast spells on your turn.
Yep, that's
good.
one a lot of people play. It just they can't counter anything during your turn.
Yeah,
Defense Grid just makes any spells they play during your turn cost 3 more.
yeah, which is really intense and my favorite.
This is a Jimmy Wong special.
Price of Glory, baby. 2 in a red. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, if it's not that player's turn, destroy that land.
So anytime they tap land for mana outside their turn, that land dies.
Now, sometimes people will just be like, fine, I lose 2 lands,
Yeah.
but I have to counter this insurrection. It's like, okay, I guess.
But that's fine because a counter once in a while is not a big deal. It's just when you have this idea of like, well, anything important I play is going to get countered like one
Yeah.
after the other. Price of Glory, it's too much attrition. They just can't keep it up.
Being able to really stop people in their tracks or just make them think twice, be like, do you want to spend that counter on me or someone else? And that's a really great feeling because it really does give you a lot of protection.
Yeah, these cards are in a meta that has, a large number of counterspells, can just like totally hose those decks.
Yeah, totally.
Then there's cards like Mana Web. So it costs 3 mana for an artifact. It says whenever a land an opponent controls is tapped for mana, tap all lands that player controls that could produce any mana of the type of land that land could produce.
That's
So,
awesome.
Yeah, if they're a blue player, anytime they counter one spell, they're tapped out of blue.
Not to mention, anytime they tap any mana on their turn, they can't even cast regular
Then they
spells.
can't hold up mana
Yeah,
during
that's
your
freaking
turn.
awesome.
Yeah. There's another card called War's Toll. It's a red enchantment. It does a similar thing.
Did you say it was, what color did you say it was?
It's red. Red is actually
my.
very good.
Oh my.
Yeah, red's actually very good at stopping counter spells sort of preemptively. Not countering them, but setting up some sort of enchantment or board state where it taxes the players.
Yeah, I really like that actually.
Yeah.
It's like weird because red usually doesn't have a controlling shell, but it does have this sort of like, if you're going to go, you have to go all in.
Yeah.
Which is also what War's Toll does. It makes other creatures attack whenever they do.
Yeah, that's the secondary part.
Yeah.
It also makes, I thought it worked on you, but it doesn't.
I'm immune to all red things because I am Jimmy the Red.
You want to read the next one?
Yes. Boseiju, who shelters all. This is like your insurance policy.
Yep.
It's a really good land. It enters the battlefield tapped, but you can tap it to pay 2 life. Add 1 to your mana pool. If that mana is spent on an instant or sorcery, that spell can't be countered by spells or abilities.
So you need to get that insurrection through Boseiju.
For the short price of 2 life and
Yep.
1 land slot.
Yep.
You'll definitely use Boseiju. It's a great way to, if your win condition is a big instant or sorcery, this is like a must include in your deck. Also, just the text can't be countered by spells or abilities is really important. There are a lot of really good cards out there that say that.
Yep.
I would recommend you search on Gatherer to see which one of those cards, if they fit in your deck, it's not a bad inclusion, especially if it's something that's really going to make an impact on the board when it hits. Because, your opponent's holding up that counter spell, and then you play an uncounterable spell. They're stuck.
They're like, what do I do?
What do I do?
Tooth and Nail.
Yeah.
There's a lot of big spells that if you just get it through, they're in really big trouble. And Boseiju definitely, if you're in a meta with a lot of counter spells, Boseiju needs to be in your deck.
Yeah.
almost
Also,
certainly.
notably, cards like Genesis Hydra when you cast spells, not when it enters the battlefield. So you'll still get the effect from it, even if it's countered.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, they can counter it all they want. I still get something.
Yeah.
Another one I really like is Vidalcan Orrery.
This card is... I keep forgetting how good this card is.
Yeah, it's basically an artifact that lets you cast all your stuff as though it had flash.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like Leyline of Anticipation.
Yep. On end step.
Yep, but Vidalcan Orrery is an artifact, so it goes in any deck rather than just blue. And this allows you to respond in the way they're responding. So they're playing this draw go is what we call it. So they're not playing anything on their main phase.
Mm-hmm.
So they can respond during everybody else's phase. Well, now when they go to counter, you don't play anything on your turn either. And if they go to counter something by somebody else, or they say, oh, on the end step before my turn, I'm going to play something that draws me a lot of cards. You go, okay, in response to that, now that you're tapped out, I'll play my creature.
Yeah.
Also, you can get, the frustrating thing sometimes about counterspells is it can really be worse for you depending on where you're sitting. If you're the person directly, before or after the counterspell player, it can be totally different how you're going to play because they're always going to have mana available for you.
Yep.
But maybe not for the third player.
That happened too in the game. I played something and someone countered it, and I was like, "Are you sure you're going to counter this?" And then two players later, someone just dropped the hammer. And I was like, "That's why you."
But they had to counter your thing because at the moment, whereas if you had just switched places with that other player, you would have had no problem. So Vidalcan Orrery allows you to basically sit in a different seat at the table.
Yeah,
because
really
you can play your stuff at any speed that you want.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of the reasons that's so powerful. And people really, I don't think they think of playing Vidalcan Orrery in their creature decks, but it can be super powerful because it also gives your creatures virtual haste.
Yeah.
They don't know what you're about to put out because you're going to put it out on the end step before your turn.
Yep.
So very strong.
I do like that quite a bit.
Yeah. And then there's a couple of cards that are kind of interesting, and I think situationally, depending on your meta, you could get away with running these if it's very heavy in counterspells. It's things like Silence and Orem's Chant.
Orem's Chant is a 1 mana or 1 white mana for an instant. It has a kicker. You can pay another additional white mana as you cast it. Target player can't cast spells this turn.
Mm-hmm. And if you pay the kicker on Orem's Chant, it basically fogs, right?
Yeah, creatures can't attack this turn.
Oh, yeah, so they can't even attack at all. So Orem's Chant's great because in a situation where you don't want to get countered, you just play Orem's Chant and name the counterspell player, and they can't play any spells now if it resolves. Yeah. And most of the time, they might counter it, but then unless they were holding up 2 counterspells, it's still doing what you wanted it to. And then also Orem's Chant has versatility where if you're about to get attacked by 1,000,000 tokens, you can cast it just to fog them.
Just a nice fog.
Silence does the same thing minus the fog. It's just 1 white. Your opponents can't cast spells this turn, so that's all your opponents. Orem's Chant's just 1 opponent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Target player.
Yeah.
Sorry, not even opponent. You could do it on yourself for whatever reason.
I don't want to cast any more spells.
That's
Maybe
like
if someone was
that's
about
like
to
really
mind
rubbing
slaver
it
you,
in, being like,
no, that wouldn't work.
No, because you'd have to, Mind Slaver wouldn't work.
I don't know when you'd want to do it on yourself.
If you know when you would want to cast Orem's Chant on yourself, please
let us know.
Let us know. Yeah, I don't think there's any cards that like you must cast this terrible thing for yourself.
Oh yeah, no, because usually they let you like cards that do that. You look at an opponent's hand and then you cast it.
Yeah.
It doesn't say you make them cast it. Anyway.
So
that's some ways to get around counterspells. We've heard a lot about counterspell heavy metas. If you come prepared for that kind of fight, you can actually really foil those decks.
Yeah, another thing politically that I like to do is get on their side.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to counter to you if you're the one that is not threatening to them. Or even like the sort of like, I really love doing this when I'm tapped out or I just don't have any counterspells. Someone plays something. Everyone just kind of looks at the counterspell player and being like, I think it's a pretty good target. I don't know. And it's great because you're going to immediately find someone else that's going to be like, yeah, you just get rid of that thing.
You should get rid of that, yeah.
While like
it's all upside for them.
looking at their hand being like, yeah, that thing. Oh my God, terrible. Hoses my deck too in ways, she's for the good of the group.
For the good of all.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about another situation. This one is, I think, a situation people don't think about a lot, but it does, again, come up a lot in games. It's my opponents or one of my opponents have a ton of lands in play.
Dang.
This happens, in fact, I'm usually the one doing this.
Yeah.
And we don't mean like
Titania.
ramp. Yeah, we don't mean ramp like mana rocks and things like that. Because a smart opponent will cheat a bunch of extra lands into play, because what are they doing, right? They're taking advantage of that social contract.
Yep.
that unwritten rule against mass land destruction.
Yeah, no one's playing Armageddon. That's for sure.
Because they know no one's going to play Armageddon because then that person's a quote-unquote jerk and everyone will get mad at them and blah, 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 blah. So they have found a loophole in the system. They're going to get a bunch of lands into play. And lands are the one thing in EDH that you feel safe about.
Yeah.
You know, if you get 20 lands into play, you're never sitting there going like, oh my gosh, they're going to blow up all my lands.
I've lost to your Glacial Chasm before because I was like, oh, I don't have the thing that gets rid of that.
Yeah. If I don't draw my one strip mine,
Yeah.
which is the one thing everybody runs, then maybe I don't.
It's funny because we do treat lands kind of like they're the little pips in Hearthstone. It's like, oh yeah, he just has 10 mana.
Yeah.
It's not like, no, you can throttle his mana if you want.
Yeah,
And we kind of do that with like stasis decks and stuff. That's like as far as we'll go, but we won't just blow up someone's lands. We just don't do that.
And most people will not. They're not running a lot of land destruction. And so that person is actually sort of cheating the system a little bit. You know,
Yeah.
they found this place. And like I said, I like to do this because that's like, oh, the social contract says that you can't destroy my lands. Then I'm going to take advantage of that as much as I can. So
Finding the edges.
That's
I like
right.
it.
So what are some of the cards that you can sort of counter this type of strategy, which again, I think you see all the time. Now that you start looking for it, I'll bet you'll go.
Oath of Lieges, 1 and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player chooses target player who controls more lands than he or she does and is his or her opponent. Such weird wording on these old cards. The first player may search his or her library for a basic land card, put that card on the battlefield, and shuffle his or her library. Hey, not bad.
So it's sort of land tax, but it also puts it into play.
Yeah, every single player gets to do it. Of course, this, you know what's interesting? This hoses like 5 color decks that have just a bunch of non-basics.
Yep, the basics, it only works on basics, but it also, that player that's cheating a bunch of lands in play, it catches everybody up.
Yep.
And probably they've wasted a whole bunch of cards, like they're playing Exploration and Burgeoning and Azusa and all
Yeah.
this stuff that's letting them cheat extra lands into play. And you're like, I play one card and I catch up to you eventually here.
Yeah, not just me. Everyone's catching up
Yeah.
too because everyone gets to have that effect.
Exactly.
And
So
all of a sudden, you're the one
and
that
everybody
we're
else
feeding off
likes
of.
you. They don't want to kill you. You're getting extra lands into play for me. So, yeah, very strong. Another one is Land Equilibrium.
That sounds like it is going to do what we want it to do.
This is 2 and 2 blue for an enchantment. If an opponent who controls at least as many lands as you would put a land onto the battlefield, that player instead puts that land onto the battlefield, then sacrifices a land.
All right.
So if they have more lands than you, they all of a sudden can't get any more farther ahead.
Yeah.
So it's
good. It's like a nice balance. It's because balance is, of course, not legal.
right. And it feels bad when you just smoke everybody's lands or
Yeah.
one player's lands so they've only got a couple left. You just put the stop sign on like, no, you just can't have any more. Yeah, so that's a good one.
Ward of Bones actually does a lot of stuff. It's not just lands. It's a 6-drop artifact. Each opponent who controls more creatures than you can't play creature cards. The same is true for artifacts, enchantments, and lands. So as long as it really just stops everyone from doing anything depending on who has more than the other person. It's really interesting. It's like it hoses so many random things except for like planeswalkers.
Yeah, there's ways to play around it to your advantage, but in general, it will stop them. The thing that we're trying to hear, which is like they can't play more lands if they have more lands than you.
Yeah, I just realized this is an awesome card in a Super Friends deck.
Oh yeah, you need to
just
put
says-
it in.
yeah, no
Oh,
one can
did
do
I just
anything.
ruin my life?
No, just partially. Don't worry about it, Josh.
Just when I play that deck.
that deck.
And then there's a bunch of the card balance variants. We talked earlier about Balancing Act. I'll remind you, it basically says that every player counts the number of permanents they have, and then they sacrifice down till they all have the same amount as the player with the least permanents.
Yeah.
So that counts your lands. If somebody has cheated 20 lands into play and they have like 4 creatures, and some other person has like 7 lands and a creature, everybody's got to go down to 8 permanents.
Yeah.
Well,
that's basically all their lands.
Yeah, they're going to go down to only 6 lands or so.
Yep.
So all that work they did getting those out, just gone. Another one is Natural Balance.
Yeah, this card's hilarious.
It's 2 and 2 green. It says each player who controls 6 or more lands chooses 5 lands he or she controls and sacrifices the rest. Each player who controls 4 or fewer lands may search his or her library for up to X basic lands and put them onto the battlefield, where X is 5 minus the number of lands he or she controls. Then you shuffle your libraries. It basically means everybody goes to 5 lands.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I also like this card in a deck where you have lands that tap for 2 mana.
Yep.
Or Scorched Veils and stuff. So
bounce lands.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very, very strong under that situation. You can play around it, but it also just says, hey, I don't care how many lands you cheated into play. We've all got the same amount now.
Yep. We're all naturally all balanced out. In fact, most cards that have the word balance in them end up doing this.
Yeah, they end up doing some form of the card balance.
I'm going to say this. I did resolve an Armageddon, and it won me the game.
You did. It was the Armageddon out of my deck.
Yeah, you actually, to be true, it was both that Armageddon and the Swan Song that you played that won the game.
Oh, that's true.
Because otherwise, I probably would have lost. It was one of the most bizarre endings to a game ever, and it was just everyone's like, we gotta go to bed.
What happened is Jimmy had, for whatever reason, whatever happened is the confluence of events led to Jimmy casting Rise of the Dark Realms. Rise of the Dark Realms?
Yes.
Army of the Damned.
Army of the Damned twice.
Army of the Damned forked.
Architect of Thought.
Okay. So Architect of Thought lets you cast stuff out of other people's graveyards.
Yeah, and I ulted him, thankfully, thanks to a doubling season.
Then he resurrected him and ulted him again in the same turn, mind you, with doubling season out both times.
Yeah.
So he cast Army of the Damned twice, forked. So he had like 36 dudes. And then I told him, literally, like, out of my deck, he should cast Armageddon the second time because no one will have any mana and you'll have 36 2/2s.
Yeah.
We'll just be dead. So that sounded great. So he did that.
And
so,
I've never cast Armageddon ever. I was like, oh, this is why this card exists.
Yeah,
I get it
when
now.
you do it. So he has a crazy board state. Nobody else has anything.
I pass you. You play an island. You pass.
I go Island Go. Then Andy goes Mountain Blasphemous Act.
The one card.
The one card in all of Magic that in that instance will like reset everything.
Yeah.
So of course I'm like, we don't want to start from ground zero here. Everybody playing a land. I'm happy that Jimmy was about to win. And so I swan songed the Blasphemous Act so that, the game would end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Pretty intense.
That's a lesson right there to be careful with Armageddon, but at the same time it worked out.
Yeah. It was really just like, look, we can do this. If we all the creatures that die, we'll just start playing lands and it's turn one all over again.
But I got a better idea. Let's end this game, get new decks, and play another game.
Yeah. A new game indeed. Yeah. So that's great. I love the fact that you can kind of get around the lands thing. People don't really like to wreck lands. That means your ramp that gets lands out is just, Market Festival, Josh.
Yep. So another reason.
I've never seen that card go off the table unless it's something kills all enchantments.
It's why it's so good because in our format, it's so taboo to start getting rid of lands.
Yeah.
And even if somebody has a strip mine, they won't use it on your Market Festival land. They'll use it on Maze of Ith or Glacial Chasm because they only have that effect once in their deck.
Which is also, by the way, why you should run a little bit of land destruction because Maze of Ith, Croson, what's the other one? That's
Core Haven.
Core Haven, yeah. Like those cards, you definitely want to get rid of them if you can, if you need to. So don't be too afraid to run land destruction, but also don't be afraid to take advantage of.
Yeah, well, that's two ways to go, right? If somebody already is taking advantage of that social contract and cheating a bunch of lands in play, then you respond like we said. If no one in your play group's doing that, you should be the player doing that.
Yeah.
Because it's very, very powerful.
And you'll probably cause the play group to move towards more people doing that until people start playing these balancing cards, and you'll create the ebb and flow of the dynamic.
That makes a healthy meta, that makes it dynamic, that makes it fun to play every week because it does not get stale and does not stagnate. So we're not going to go over a whole bunch of other situations, but I'll just touch on a couple just to notice them. So you also will see decks with just no creatures.
Yeah.
This will happen from time to time where somebody will have, Narset deck or a Jaleva deck or
a Tasker deck with only non-lands, or like they have just a bunch of lands.
Right. Ashling with all lands and just Ashling and that kind of thing. So these are things to keep an eye out. If you're seeing that a lot in your meta, then you need to respond. Just a lot of enchantments. Some metas like to play very few enchantments and some like to play a ton. And that's an obvious answer is just run enchantment removal. But you have to be cognizant that that's happening before you can respond to it.
Yeah, I think actually enchantment, that's like the one big one. It's like either people are running a ton because they just know they're not going to get wrecked, kind of like their lands, or people don't run any because they know it's just guaranteed going to be going away, and putting all your eggs in one basket is not going to work.
Yeah, and then that ebb and flow you're talking about happens because what happens? I run a lot of enchantments. People start running a lot of enchantment hate. I take enchantments out of my deck. They take their enchantment hate out of their deck. What can I do? I add a lot of enchantments, and here we go on that loop to loop. So just
unless
pay
you're
attention
smart
to the
and just
cycle.
put in like utter ends and stuff that get rid of all things.
Everything.
Yeah.
That's why cards like Utter End are so good.
Yep.
Another one, again, we won't go through this will be the last one. Just a lot of tutoring. So Sheldon and some other notable people talk about how they don't like tutors in the format. And there are a lot of cards that stop tutoring. They say you can't search your deck or...
Even Mind Sensor.
Yep. Cards like that. And so those are cards that if you notice there's a lot of tutoring going on, especially if it's leading to combos, then even Mind Sensor and cards like that, which stop tutoring through the deck, like Obnixilis, does damage when they do. And there's a lot of cards that sort of deal with searching through decks and stop that kind of stuff. Then it's time to start pulling out those cards. They're not expensive. Well, Avon is, but a lot of the other ones aren't. And using those to stop all this tutor shenanigans that are happening. And you can think of it this way. I'm playing a card and it's turning off, 5, 10, 8 cards in my opponent's decks, each of them.
Yeah, that's pretty solid. Yeah, you're definitely going to find use out of that. There's also at GP Oklahoma, the deck that won the modern GP was Lantern Control. And a lot of tutors, if you guys know, put cards on the top of the deck. This deck was all about seeing what the top card is, and like a Codex Shredder would get rid of the top card and mill it. So that's also a really viable strategy too. If you have a way to deal with what they're bringing to the top of their library at instant speed, then you can just immediately be like, sorry, you brought that card up there? Well, guess what? It's gone now.
Yeah, and the next one might be a land. Or,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
So just the overall message here is to pay attention to your meta, but not just the cards, also the types of situations that you're running into. So, this can be all kinds of things. It can be graveyard shenanigans. It can be, just fast decks. It can be a lot of aggro strategies maybe, or it's control. They're slow decks. Well, if everybody's deck is slow, yours needs to get faster.
Yeah.
Those type of things. Be aware of what's going on in your meta so that you can tailor your deck to take everybody down.
Yeah, I'd say one of the common mistakes is tailoring your deck to match the meta, where if it is really slow, you'll be like, oh, I'm going to play a slow Dirtly deck. It's like, well, that's actually not what you want to do. Because a healthy meta, like we talked, you need to be pushing the boundaries because it's, one, way more fun, a lot more interactive, and it encourages people to start thinking in the same way, and the games just get way more interesting.
Yeah, exactly, because then it's move and counter move.
Yeah.
Then it's more rock, paper, scissors, or it's more like fencing,
Yeah.
rather than just like two guys like blindly swinging as hard as they can at each other's head. I want move, counter move. I want thrust and parry.
I'd rather have some parries and stuff too. Yeah, it definitely makes the games much more interesting. And if you're really, it's much more satisfying too to really fight for a win.
Yeah, and to know that I put this card in my deck just for these types of situations, and here it is.
Yeah.
And it's not gonna Iona shut them down, because that's not fun. It's not a card that just naturally does that.
Yeah.
It's like, I read the meta, I predicted this situation was gonna come up, and here comes this card, and it doesn't actually say anything except for that they can't cast cards during my turn.
You might say, instead of Iona Shield of Emeria, it was, I read the meta, and then something.
I read the Shield of the meta. Shoot. Remember Mingo Malingo, though?
Yeah, I do
Mingo
remember
Malingo was cool.
Lingo was all right. Mingo, Belingo, Lingo. He was a billion things.
When we made Mingo Malingo, that was great. That was so much better than what just happened.
You mean I read the meta? Shield of Josh Lee Kwaiya?
It's just getting better and better.
It's improving. I drew Iona twice, by the way, when I was playing against Josh, and for the sake of him playing a mono green deck, I was like, you're getting mold back
People
into
just
the deck.
always have Iona when I'm playing that deck. I have one mono deck, and for whatever reason, it just runs into Iona consistently.
Yeah, fortunately, Battle for Zendikar has you covered at the common. It's a new 7 drop.
Well, next week will be our...
Yes, next week will
be our set review, so then we can talk about all the awesome cards. Oh man!
By the time you guys hear this, the set will have been spoiled,
right?
And I will have come back from the Community Cup,
and you will have won it, and you also will have made Havelands happen.
Yes, Havelands. Hashtag Havelands.
Hashtag Havelands. Everybody.
Hashtag Havelands. Tweet.
Hashtag Havelands.
Hey.
Hashtag Havelands.
Do it.
Hashtag Havelands.
Tell Marshall.
Okay. Moving on to the end step, where we talk about something cool outside of the world of Magic. Oh, crap.
There's nothing cool outside the world of Magic, clearly.
I didn't think ahead here.
Well, I know we have a really good one for this Thursday's episode.
We do?
Yeah.
What is it? This is the Thursday episode.
This is the Thursday episode?
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. We had a really good one for the Tuesday episode.
That's true.
Thanks so much, everyone, for...
all your suggestions how... This is just bad. This is another reason we're not going to do Thursday episodes as often, because
we just don't have
coming
end
up with
steps.
2 ends. No, I'm just kidding. That's not the reason.
That's true. Let me look at. Let's see. I'm going to look at my email and see what happened recently. Nothing here. Going to go over here. Look over here. Nothing here. Yep. It's the end step. Dun, 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 dun.
Hey, if you guys haven't checked out our sister podcast, you should. They're called The Masters of Modern. Alex Kessler and Ben Bateman talk about modern and all things competitive Magic. They have some really awesome guests on there. You should check them out. You can go to rocketjump.com. They're right next to us under the podcast tab, or you can follow them on Twitter at the MMcast.
Our editor for the show is Eli Quay. Special thanks to Geoffrey Palmer for the living card animation. You can find them online at Living Cards MTG. He provides living card animations for all of our videos at youtube.com/the Command Zone Podcast.
All right, everybody, thanks for listening.
And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Peace. You think they noticed?
I don't think so. End step.
Peace.
End step. Peace.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter at JFWong and at Josh Lee Kwai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.